Hey guys, I know you're probably used to seeing me in Flavor and Fiction, which is the segment where I do a book review based off of my 2020 reading challenge, and then I make a recipe using an ingredient mentioned in the book. But today's a little bit different. Just in light of everything going on, recent events with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and a myriad of others, too many others, I just decided, you know what, I'm going to share some of the books I have on my own bookshelf by Black authors, just because I want to. And it's not being issued as a challenge or anything like that. It's not a book tag. It's just me sharing what I have on my shelf. Also, at the end of the video, I'm going to announce the book giveaway and what you have to do in order to receive this book. So we're going to get started. This won't be a long video because I don't like watching 45-minute videos, so I'm not going to make this one. So we're going to move through these fast. It's not going to be like a big book discussion. I'm just sharing what I have. So let's go. Okay, first up is the category of children and young adults. And I'm only sharing a portion of what I have. First up is a book that I either read this in 5th or 6th grade and loved it. Yellow Bird and Me. I'll let you see the cover there. It's by Joyce Hanson, and I think the characters are in 6th grade, but the main character is a girl named Doris who her best friend moves away, and she ends up tutoring the class clown, Yellow Bird. And she doesn't want to, but kind of reluctantly agrees to it. And it's just a book about looking past the surface and looking deeper at people and forming friendships. And it was great. So that's Yellow Bird and Me by Joyce Hanson. And the next book we have in the category Young Adult is The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. I know you've all heard of this book and probably the movie as well. It's a high school student star who witnesses the horrific shooting of her friend by the police. So you may not have the stomach to read it just yet. Next, we have the category of self-help / instructional, I guess. The first one is Working It by RuPaul, whom I adore. RuPaul's Guide to Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Style. It's worth it just for the pictures alone. Look at that. Gorgeous. The next one is called The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table. And I did a review for this for Flavor and Fiction. The author is Minda Harts, and she's very active on Twitter and social media. So check her out in her seminars. She's really great. My father sent me this. I think I was complaining about career a little too much, and so he bought this and sent it to me, and then I'm supposed to give it to my sister next so she can read it. So just a great resource. Next up in the category of fantasy, we have this one, which is Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. I covered this one for Flavor and Fiction as well. It's rough and it's complicated, so I'm not going to get too far into it. All it is there's someone named Tracker who's able to find people by scent. He can see where you've been and where you're headed once he has the scent. And so he has to track down a lost member of the royal family. I'll just leave it at that. It's a lot. It's not for the weak-hearted or the weak-stomached. It's a lot that happens in here. Okay, next up, you've probably heard of this. You probably read this. The Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. I've read a lot of mixed reviews about this. I did a review for Flavor and Fiction for this one as well. I liked it. So this takes place in a fictional West African country. The main character is Zeli. She lives in a land where there used to be magic, but it was stolen from the people. And once she witnesses the spark of magic that no one knew still existed, she has a quest to go on. And we know we love a quest. So that's the shortest version I can give you. And then there is, which I have not read yet, the sequel, The Children of Virtue and Vengeance. So I'm looking forward to this. Okay, next up in the category of romance, I have 3 books here. I have more on the shelf, but I have 3 books by 2 different authors here. The first one is In Another Man's Bed by Frances Ray. Oh, the light is so bright, you can barely see that, but you get the gist. So this is about a woman who walks in on her husband with another woman. She leaves the house, she drives away and never wants to see him again. And she almost gets her wish when he gets into this horrific car accident, ends up like in a coma. She's faced between taking him off life support, and she's dealing with all these emotions. And then in the meantime, an old love reappears. It makes her decision even more difficult. Right, the next one is If You Were My Man by Frances Ray. It's about a woman who owns a restaurant. Her husband died 4 years ago. She hasn't dated anyone since. And then she meets Raphael, and he's a hostage negotiator with his own set of problems. I'm just reading the back of this book. It's hilarious. Blah, 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 blah. When the unexpected happens, she's forced to keep a secret. Okay, it's dramatic, y'all. And the third one here is Savvy Sisters by Brenda Jackson. I like Brenda Jackson. So this book is about 3 friends. You have Amber, who escaped an abusive marriage and like doesn't want to date anyone. And then of course she meets some dreamy man. And then you have Brandy, who after her divorce settlement, she is left the owner. She gets the hotel that they owned in her divorce settlement. So she has to manage all that. And then she ends up getting a stalker, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know. Then enters, FBI agent. And then the third friend, Carla, she has a 2-year-old son. And she is trying to save her business from a man who's trying to like do a hostile takeover. And then I guess they kind of fall, whatever. There it is. So there's your romance. In the category of religion or inspiration, I have Journey to the Well, 12 Lessons on Personal Transformation by Bishop Vashti M. McKenzie. And here it is. That's what she looks like. She made history by becoming the first woman selected to serve as bishop in the AME church. So next is the category of novels that didn't really fit in with the other categories. And the first one up is one of my favorites by one of my favorite authors of all time, Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. Now this is one that you can read right now. Go get it right now. It was actually his first novel, if you can believe it. It's considered an American classic now, but it shows like the battle between 2 generations within their family, mixed in with the battle of society going through an even bigger change. Okay, next we have The Quest of the Silver Fleece by W Eb Des Bois. Du Bois. This is his first novel. He had, a few nonfiction works before this, like The Souls of Black Folks. But he wanted to connect with people who weren't reading his nonfiction, which is why he wrote this book. Okay, now this one I love. The #1 Ladies Detective Agency by Alexander McCall Smith. This is #1 in a series, and they did a TV show. They did 1 season of the show with Jill Scott as the lead, and I'm so mad that it was canceled because it was so good. It was wonderful. Okay, next up we have Some People, Some Other Place by J. California Cooper. And in this book, Eula too is her name. She lives in the South. She is trying to get out. Generation after generation gets a little step closer in education, a little step closer to getting out, but no one actually has. So she's determined, and she wants to go to Chicago, I think, just to get away. But she's the oldest of 14. So the family needs her. She feels trapped, and then something else happens where she knows, if I don't leave right now, I never will. So she does, and she runs towards her dreams and finds out they got problems in Chicago too. Okay, so up next we have Some Sing, Some Cry by Ntozake Shange and Ifa Baeza. Now, Ntozake Shange is the author of For Color Girls Who've Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. That you probably heard of and have maybe seen the movie. So these 2 authors, they are real life sisters. and they wrote this book together. And it's about a woman who is recently emancipated, and she takes her granddaughter and flees South Carolina, and they carve out a life for themselves. And the cool thing is, I actually went to the book reading. I think it was at the Brooklyn Museum, but I got my copy signed. Isn't that nice? Right, so moving right along to nonfiction / Black history, we have 1001 Things Everyone Should Know About African American History by Jeffrey C. Stewart. And this has short little descriptions about different Black history facts, like everything from Booker T. Washington to hair straightening, to work songs, to the Harlem Renaissance. I'm just flipping through and reading. So it's a start, little tidbits. All right, next up we have Black Power by Richard Wright. If you know Richard Wright, most likely it's for his works Native Son and Black Boy. But this is a nonfiction work that he published in 1954, which is just 6 years before he passed away. It chronicles his trip to Africa's Gold Coast before it became the Free Nation of Ghana. Next up, we have The Hip Hop Generation by Bakari Kitwana. And here it is. And Bakari Kitwana was the executive editor at The Source and the editorial director at Third World Press. This book is described as a testament to Black youth culture at the turn of the century, the only in-depth study of the first generation to grow up in post-segregation America. Next, we have Waiting Till the Midnight Hour, a narrative history of Black power in America by Peniel E. Joseph. Here's the cover. And it has been described as a mesmerizing journey through the radical wing of America's civil rights revolution. The next category is collections. We are going to start with Two by George Jackson. We have Blood in My Eye and Soledad Brother. And I actually did a review for Flavor and Fiction with Soledad Brother. If you don't know, George Jackson was a Black man who was convicted at 18 years old for stealing $70 from a gas station. He was sentenced to 1 to 100 years. The first book he published was Soledad Brother. It's a collection of letters, mostly from between he and his father. And Blood in My Eyes, his second book, it's more like a collection of essays with his thoughts of race relations and class war and communism and everything. And even with everything that he was going through, he wrote, "They'll never count me among the broken men." So it's for George Jackson. Next, we have Furious Flower, African American Poetry from the Black Arts Movement to the Present, edited by Joanne V. Gavin. And there it is. And I haven't touched this book in a long time, but I see that I made markings next to, I guess, my favorite poems, like Nikki Rosa by Nikki Giovanni. Next, we have The Collected Poetry of Nikki Giovanni. There should be no explanation necessary. She's one of the most celebrated, controversial, and influential poets of the era. Next, we have another book that I have not read yet, Dark Water, Voices from Within the Veil by W Eb Des Bois. There it is. It's a collection of essays, sketches, and poems, first published nearly 80 years ago. Now, I already brought up Ntozake Shange earlier when I mentioned For Color Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. Look at that cover. Beautiful. And this is described as a choreo poem. It is meant to be performed, and it has been performed even on Broadway. Next up, we have Life Lit by Some Large Vision by Ossie Davis. And this is a collection of speeches and writings. And let me tell you something. I had the pleasure of hearing Ossie Davis make an impromptu speech. He was just the most eloquent eloquent speaker I've ever heard in my life. Next, we're back to one of my favorite authors, James Baldwin. This is Going to Meet the Man. And this is a book of short stories, really about suffering. Here's the quote: "There's no way not to suffer, but you try all kinds of ways to keep from drowning in it." Next up, we have Tales of the Out and the Gone by Amiri Baraka, short stories, formerly known as Leroy Jones. He's an author and a teacher, and he focuses more on Black liberation and white racism. Okay, and the last one in this category that I'm going to share is Letter to My Daughter by Maya Angelou. Now, Maya Angelou does not have a daughter. Technically, she only has one son, but she's often said that even though I gave birth to one son, I have many daughters. And that's because she feels a connectedness to every woman, especially every Black woman, and sharing those experiences. This wasn't technically a collection, but I still put it in the category for some reason. The book I just finished reading, A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. It's a play. I did a flavor and fiction about it. Go check out what it's about. It's a classic. So if you don't know what it's about, what have you been doing? All right, we have reached the very last category, even though it has a lot of books, but we're going to move through them because the category is memoir. So I feel like I don't have to tell you too much. It's about the person's life. First, we have A Hungry Heart by Gordon Parks. He was the first Black photographer for Life magazine, so it was a huge deal. Next, we have The Audacity of Hope by Barack Obama. Next, we have No Easy Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. After 27 years of being imprisoned, he wrote this. He combined, it's really a collection of articles, speeches, letters from underground, and the transcripts of the trials in which he was accused. Next, we have Raising Fences, a Black Man's Love Story by Michael Dacher. He was born as a product of rape, and he was given up for adoption, and just everything that he went through growing up made him feel unlovable and unloved, and how he had to work through that to fulfill his own love story. Next, we have The Measure of a Man, a Spiritual Autobiography by Sidney Poitier. This is Oprah's book club. He was the first Black actor to win an Academy Award for Best Actor for his outstanding performance in Lilies of the Field in 1963. Okay, next we have Yeah, I Said It by Wanda Sykes. Now, I have a bookmark in here showing that I guess I didn't finish reading this, but I think I'm going to. I'm going to put this on my list for this year, especially because the bookmark is placed in the chapter titled Black Panther Woods. And the first sentence is, I remember when Tiger Woods was Black. Okay, we will pick this up. Next, we have Callous on My Soul by Dick Gregory. Here it is. Dick Gregory was a comedian, but he was very much an activist. And he did a lot of activism through his comedy. He was no holds barred. Next, we have Infidel by Ayaan Hirsi Ali. There it is. And this was a very popular book when it came out, very powerful. It's about a woman who, she grew up in like a very strict Muslim household. She escaped to the Netherlands to escape an arranged marriage that was being forced upon her. Okay, next we have The Autobiography of Leroy Jones, Amiri Baraka. I already told you who he was when we did the short stories, Tales of the Out and the Gone. So you can just rewind and check it out if you missed what I said about Amiri Baraka. Okay, next up we have Bone Black, Memories of Girlhood by Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks is an author and an activist. I don't know if you can see it. There you go. And she mainly writes about gender, race, and capitalism, and how all of those things intersect. I remember getting emotional reading this book. It almost reminded me, well, maybe I shouldn't say this, but it almost reminded me a little bit of Mike Tyson. How Mike Tyson once said that he felt like no one cared about him. So when certain people wanted to turn him into a monster, he was fine with it because at least they cared enough to want him to be anything. that's kind of how I felt about this book. I'm not going to say much more about it, but it'll get you. Next up, we have Higher is Waiting by Tyler Perry. And I actually just sent this book to my brother. I hope you're reading it, Richard. So you know who Tyler Perry is. He talks about the physical and emotional pain that he went through growing up, the faith that it took to overcome that hurt and to want to strive forward and not to want to give up. And it's a short, inspirational book. Next up is Blue Rage, Black Redemption. This is by Stanley Tukey Williams. He is now you don't see this every day, a Crips co-founder and Nobel Peace Prize nominee. Here's what it looks like. Next, we have The Last Black Unicorn by Tiffany Haddish. I sent this book to my aunt and she read it and sent it back to me for me to read. And I actually heard that the audiobook might be better because it's her and you get to hear her life in her voice. And last but not least, this is the last book before I announce the giveaway. We have Huey, Spirit of the Panther by David Hilliard. And David Hilliard was the chief of staff of the Black Panther Party who knew Huey intimately. And this is his account. And it reads, Huey P. Newton remains one of the most misunderstood political figures of the 20th century. We all know that Huey Newton was a co-founder, along with Bobby Seale, of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And many people don't understand what the Black Panther Party was for, why it was created, and its purposes. So of course they don't understand Huey P. Newton. But in the midst of all this unrest and of all the current protesting that's going on, maybe Huey Newton would be a little bit more understood. So this is your time to read Huey. So this is a book that I read, and I think someone gifted me the book right after I bought it. So I ended up with two, and it is Some Love, Some Pain, Some Time by J. California Cooper. And it's a book of stories. And I believe it's 3 different women who have their own struggles with romance and family and work and just life. And if you know J. California Cooper, like, her style of writing really resonates. So what do you have to do to win this giveaway? Well, I'll tell you. First, you need to show some type of proof, a screenshot or something to show that you have donated to either a bail fund, a Black Lives Matter fund, a GoFundMe account for a protester, or to the Innocence Project, or anything along those lines. You can email it to me. You can send it to me on a private message in social media if you follow one of the accounts that'll be below. And the first person to do this, I will mail this book to you for you to read. So thank you so much for joining me in this segment. Again, this is just a portion of what I have on my shelf. Feel free to share any recommendations you have below in any of the categories that I mentioned. Oh, and one last thing before I go. Black Lives Matter. See you next week.